Sergo, it is Friday, May 4th. I guess this is where we say May the 4th be with you, I guess, 2018. I want to welcome you to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people. We'll look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe, that's CKWE in Tanganyika. You can find us streaming at www.ltnradionet.com. We stream live when we're live, and when we're not live, we're replaying previous shows. So you can go to that website anytime. Again, that's www.ltnradionet.com. We are also streaming live on Facebook with Facebook Live. So you can check out our video. You can go to, it's being posted up on a bunch of group pages, but certainly on our Let's Talk Native group page, you can find us there. You can find us while we're streaming live, and of course that video stays up so you can check it out anytime. These 1 hour shows go relatively quickly, so buckle in and give us a listen, take a look, and I'll look for your comments as well. I am John Kane. I'm the show's host and producer, and I want to thank you for joining me. Will you open up with a little bit of Davy John's band, Resonation, is it? Resonation, yeah. I like that instrumental. It actually feels like an intro song. I'm sure they didn't write it for me, but I like it anyway. So we open with that from time to time. As I said in my promo, this is a bit of a mixed bag. I don't have one big major news headline or one big topic to talk about. In the second half of the show, I do want to talk about Salamanca. I think there is a conversation that needs to be had there, and so I want to spend some time talking about that. But in the first half, let me talk about some things that you may or may not be aware of. First off, if you're not paying attention to Hawaii, I feel very strongly about not just Hawaii as a place, but the people and so much of what they go through as an indigenous people, whether we like that title or not, but as a Native people, watching what has been transpiring for over 100 years on their land, on their paradise, their island paradise, right? Between military occupation, an illegal national occupation, the illegality of turning it into a state of the United States, first a territory of the United States and then a state of the United States. The impact that tourism has had in devastating the ecosystems, the impact that the agribusinesses, controlled by rich, powerful white people, which actually led to the illegal occupation in the first place, the impact of a tremendous military presence that not only has contaminated major parts of the island, but has upset the ecosystems in the water in the entire Pacific Rim, all of that stuff. Well, you can't ignore the fact that there is feedback and that there's response and there's reaction from nature, and we've seen it in terms of many things that have transpired in terms of flooding, rain, the manipulation of water in general. But last month I talked about the fact that they had an incredible amount of flooding. It didn't make the news a lot. There weren't a whole lot of people who were paying attention. Certainly the president of the United States didn't pay attention, but look what he's ignored in terms of Puerto Rico, for that matter. But they had over almost 30 inches of rain in a 24-hour period on the island of Kauai. Just incredible amounts of rain and lots of devastation caused by it. And the thing is, under normal circumstances, the Native people of Hawaii can deal with that kind of impact. But when prime real estate is built up and the lands are manipulated to where the Native people are oftentimes living in areas that are more subject to natural disasters, low-lying areas, and that kind of stuff, they are oftentimes impacted first. That's not always the case. One of the things that is happening now, if you haven't been paying attention over the last couple of days, has been volcanic activity. There have been earthquakes over the last 48 hours. Over 100 quakes or tremors that have taken place. Some of these rather significant. I mean, obviously the first major one they talked about was 5.0 on the Richter scale. Then another one happened yesterday that was over 5, and then today there was one that was almost 7. It was 6.9 on the Richter scale. These are This starts to get major earthquake status here, and of course, it's causing fissures in the land side. It isn't just the idea of it erupting out of an established volcano mouth. What happens with these earthquakes is the earth opens up, and then lava starts flowing out of these huge cracks, and that's what they're seeing. And of course, again, native people living in a more traditional lifestyle know that these things happen. They've learned how to live with the volcanoes, and they know that sometimes the volcanoes are gonna wipe out villages. And so the villages are only semi-permanent. But now you get white people, trying to buy their piece of paradise and take it off the market, so to speak, and building these homes in these residential areas. And so now you've got permanent structures that are being destroyed. And of course, everybody's going to be, boo-hooing about some of these permanent structures being built, never really considering how much those permanent structures have impacted the ecosystems in the first place. But again, I do wish that you would look, check out the news. There's lots of coverage of it if you look for it. It isn't being covered widely on the mainstream media, but there is. I mean, it's pretty spectacular to see this lava flowing, because that's how these islands were born. These islands were born out of volcanoes. I mean, that's where these land bases were built from volcanic eruption. And so when you see that there's always a bit of a constant lava flow happening in various places in Hawaii, but to see this and to see this level, and what I think is making everybody anxious is some of the buildup with these earthquakes, increasing in not only number but in ferocity. It makes their wonder if there's going to be a major eruption, of the explosive nature that people have I've seen in the past. That's not what Hawaii has experienced recently. They've got active volcanoes, but now they're seeing lava flow, and the question is there going to be a burst? I mean, is there going to be something major? And of course, it isn't just about lava. It isn't just about heat and fire. There are toxic gases that come with this stuff. There's and of course, for man, it's always everything's about the impact on human beings, but there's obviously impact on other things as well. So look, I ask that you take a look and you give some thoughts to especially to the native people of Hawaii, the people who are oftentimes living on the edge of sustainability, I guess, because of the impacts that tourism and the economy of the state has taken over that territory. But they're not the only ones impacted, but they're the ones that I feel most concerned about. So take a look and follow the story, and when they do begin to do some fundraising campaigns and that kind of stuff to help the people who are displaced, by all means, try to do your homework and make sure that you're not being scammed, and that you're supporting the right causes as that goes. So I just again, I wanted to mention that because I do have friends who live in Hawaii. I have been following both the flooding from last month and now this volcanic activity that's happening now. Another environmental issue, in case you missed it, there was what is considered a major oil spill in Montana on the Fort Peck Reservation. Of course, native territories impacted by this, and it's not just oil, which 600 barrels of oil, which that's a pretty good sized leak for. And this was supposed to be coming from wells that were supposed to have been shut, but also 90,000 barrels of brine, which is what they call production water, fracking water, that is leaking and contaminating livestock ponds and that kind of stuff. So there you have it. I mean, this is what we fight the fossil fuels industry over. Recently I was listening to a program on NPR that talked about the impact of the oil rush in North Dakota in particular, the Bakken crude areas. And one of the people they had an author who had written a book about this, and one of the people that she had profiled in her book was a guy who had gone there to make some money. Basically he was a surfer dude, right? Not exactly you think somebody who has that kind of relationship with sun and sand and beach and that kind of stuff would not be so prone to jump into an activity that has negative impact on the ground. In fact, when he was asked about that, as a surfer, how do you feel about this? How would you feel about this kind of activity happening, on a beach? And he said, well, this is probably the best place for this stuff to happen. And that comment hung with me, because that's the view that's how this stuff happens. People look at a people, and they think that the people are insignificant. The land is insignificant because it's remote, maybe not densely populated. So when we talk about sacrifice zones, that's why the Bakken crude can be extracted the way it is, because there's so many within the dominant culture that can say, better do it here than anyplace else. And almost like that's what this land is for. It is to be raped and pillaged and plundered. And the people who've called it home for thousands of years, well, they'll just have to get over it. And so even people who don't seem who may not have this terrible intent, I guess, or may not seem like evil people, when you boil it all down, you still come to a place where you realize, wow, there are people who just who can be so dismissive of other people and of other land. And and of course, the guys who show up there to work these oil fields, they don't live in the area. There are people that oftentimes, they describe some of these guys. Some of these are people who figure this is not only a place that they can make a bunch of money, but it's a place they can go and get a fresh start. Some of these guys are, they talked about them being, child predators, rapists and murderers, people with criminal records who still have the physical wherewithal to go do, a hard day's work. So they go up there and they make a bunch of money off the oil fields, get in a bunch of debt, and they drink and they party and they do all this other stuff. But they're out there making their money in a place that they can escape their other life, right? Because now they're not in, they're not where they grew up. They're not in the cities where they worked or they lived. They're not. They can escape the rest of what had become their reality and start a new reality that is directly tied to placing land and people in jeopardy. But it's not very many people, and it's remote land, so they think it's okay. And of course, it isn't just the idea of trucking this stuff and extracting this stuff. Then there's the pipelines that stretch over thousands of miles that are going to carry this stuff. And what continuously is evidenced by these oil leaks is how much BS is associated with their monitoring systems. So whether it's the Dakota Access Pipeline or the Keystone XL Pipeline or any of the other thousands of pipelines, they all claim to have computer-controlled monitoring systems that if there's a breach, if there's a leak, they'll get a warning or an alarm will go off because they'll have a pressure drop or something like that. And invariably, most of these leaks get discovered by a passerby. This leak that I'm talking about in Montana, this was discovered by a farmer who was flying over his land and saw and sees the big black stain. And that's usually how these things are discovered. And that means that they may be leaking for days. And of course, every time they do an estimate and they say that it was this many, tens of thousands of barrels or gallons of oil or whatever else, it always seems to be wrong. And of course, they're always going to estimate on the lowest side possible. And then you find out months later, 6 months later, a year later, that it was 2 or 3 times what they claim was actually leaked. I mean, this is what is involved in this industry, and it's why we as Native people and our allies feel so strongly about trying to move away from fossil fuels. I know it's not a thing that's going to happen with the turn of a switch, but when you look at even here, in New York, part of the environmental movement that is so that's trying to hold Andrew Cuomo to task, yeah, he makes all these these promises and these predictions about being renewable by 2020, or having a higher percentage of renewables, but the percentage is still pretty low on wind and solar. It's quite low, and when you match that up with the commitment that is being made by somebody like Andrew Cuomo or these other governors who think that pursuing natural gas is the stepping stone to to real renewables, because it burns cleaner. It has a huge carbon footprint associated with hydrofracking and all of the activity that goes into extracting natural gas, and it requires a huge infrastructure build. When they say, oh, we're gonna do a bunch of natural gas, liquid natural gas buses or fleet vehicles or whatever else, so you're gonna make that commitment and that investment to prolong that use of fossil fuels. And that's what a lot of the environmentalists and the people who are so against fossil fuels, and including many Native people, are so opposed to. Because yeah, it all sounds good on paper when you say where you're going or trying to reduce carbon footprint here and there. But when you look at where the dollars really are going, and when you look at how much the percentages, how slowly the percentages that are shifting towards renewables, it's not nearly the commitment. It sounds good on paper, when percentages are forecasted. But when you look at what's really happening on the ground and the reality, there's still major investments, even if they are shifting, towards natural gas. That's still major investments that are going into fossil fuels, and that's a problem. And that's what we're seeing in these industries, with these problems, everywhere. So. It does become incumbent on us, the people who do remain active. I mean, again, I continue to applaud the work of the Senecas and their allies for standing up to the hydrofracking industry's attempt to basically lure a small town like Coudersport into taking tens of thousands of gallons of hydrofracking wastewater on a daily basis. And these are towns that are struggling financially, and they're looking for ways to create revenue for their coffers, and then these guys with big wallets and big checkbooks come in and say, well, here's how we can make you some money. And the only problem is you're going to be dumping some water into the headwaters of the Allegheny that you're going to treat first, but nod, nod, wink, wink. We know you're not going to be able to get all the contaminants out, because for one thing, we're not going to tell you what contaminants are in there. And we know you can't get radioactive contaminants out. So this is, again, I applaud the work that went into to convincing Coudersport area municipal agency from making a bad decision there. And pressuring the Pagulas and others to withdraw from some of that. But this is the stuff we got to stay vigilant, because there are still major dollars being dumped in, from places that you bank, and, people that are managing your retirement funds and that kind of stuff that are investing in these industries. And again, when you consider what Donald Trump has in place for the EPA and for the Interior Department, there's no protections there. These guys are dirtbags. I mean, they really are. These guys are the worst. And as is Trump. So for these guys, it's all about money, and it isn't about the future. It certainly isn't 7 generations. It's what they're pocketing on a daily basis, and what they're pocketing today. So we have to be the ones that are responsible to future generations, because we know that some of these people in positions of power aren't going to be. All right, got a few minutes before I hit to the bottom of the hour. I do have another story I got to talk about. Couple of Mohawk young men who were living in New Mexico, but they're from Akwesasne originally. They registered and paid for a tour. I mean, it was an organized tour of Colorado State University. They wanted to look at going to school there. So they they borrowed the family car and drove 7 or 8 hours to go to Colorado State University to tour the facility with an organized group that does such a thing. Somewhere in the tour, a white woman, one of the parents of perhaps another student, I don't know, but some white woman decided to call the police because she said these two native boys were making her nervous. So they were removed from the tour and then interrogated, and then, of course, released because there was nothing that could be founded in this woman's suspicions. But by the time they were released, the tour was essentially over. In fact, they even had trouble finding where the tour was. So they, look, there was out of pocket expense. They had registered for this thing. They had driven, all these miles to go to this university, only to be singled out based on their race, based on being native, being profiled, and then and treated such a way. I mean, it has the sound, the sound and the feel of the Starbucks issue where the black men were arrested and thrown out of a Starbucks. It has some of that feel. I know that this thing did grab attention pretty quickly. The University of Colorado is trying to bend over some to accommodate. Apparently, they plan on flying these boys back out to do the tour and to compensate them for their expenses that were wasted on the trip. Yeah, I've heard even comments coming out of state officials in Colorado, including the lieutenant governor. There is really this thing grabbed some headlines, and it should, because I mean this isn't just the idea of racially profiling somebody and having two native kids removed from a group simply because some white privileged woman felt nervous about them. But these were young men. These are young men that are just coming out of their adolescence and really starting to approach the world and view the world and their opportunities in it, and actually taking the steps to pursue those opportunities in the world. So, yeah, I mean, this is the worst. This is the worst. I mean, to grab kids at this age who are really being imprinted by the world around them, and to have this imprint placed upon them, not only by the police that had to investigate them, interrogate them, which I'm sure made them nervous and ashamed. I mean, and that to me is the biggest issue. When you are made to feel ashamed of who you are, and the thing is, from the accounts that I've read, it's not like they did something. In fact, the woman said they made her nervous because they were so quiet. I mean, really? I mean, this is just incredible behavior, because I know plenty of Native people who aren't quiet. And maybe the fact that they were quiet was the reason they were able to be, I guess, taken advantage. In fact, I think one of the police officers suggested to them, "Well, you guys got to speak up for yourself." You know what happens when we speak up for ourselves? That's when we get labeled, and that's when people of color end up getting shot and killed. Because when we stand up for ourselves, especially in an environment where we are in the extreme minority, this is where we're most vulnerable. And again, it's amazing to me that in 2018, this level of racism and the inability to deal. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, well, yeah, you're gonna have those. You're gonna have those people who are racist, but if you accommodate them through your policies and procedures, if you are incapable of handling the fact that, yeah, some individuals' racial tendencies are going to, boil up to the surface, and you have no ability to deal with them, but instead you go along with that, and so you throw out the two black men sitting in a Starbucks. You grab the two young Native kids who are just trying to tour a university. And you end up developing this preconceived notion that they must have done something. They must be up to no good. And that's what we end up being faced with. And again, we have stereotypes. We have these profiles that exist for for people of color, Native people in particular. I mean, we get labeled as, as again, these descendants of a fierce primitive people. So I mean, it just opens up. I mean, that's what makes people nervous, because they don't know how to deal with the fact that we still exist, because we don't fit their stereotype necessarily. They don't know what to expect out of a Native person, and so their immediate reaction is fear and rejection, and that's what these kids had to experience at the Colorado State University. Look, I'm hearing some of the overtures that both the university and the state are trying to make sure this doesn't happen again. Look, these are the stories that have to be made public, and because the only way to address this thing is to shine lights on them. And I know there are plenty of people out there who say, "Oh, it's not that big a deal. Get over it." We hear this from the political right in particular, and the most racist people in the U.S. and Canada, and again, it's the same in the U.S. and Canada, that we are viewed in this negative way, and so it always gets shifted. It's kind of like that the officers telling these kids, "Well, you got to speak up for yourself." The burden gets placed on us to overcome this racial profiling. The burden becomes on us to justify not just who we are, but why we are where we are, why we're sitting in a Starbucks, why we're standing on a corner, why we're doing a tour for a college, for a university. The fact that we have to explain ourselves. Forget about this whole presumption of innocence. That's not even close to happening. But instead, we have this presumption of suspicion. And look, I know Americans in their fragile state, especially the white fragility, it makes them worried about anybody of color. I mean, for one thing, I think some of this is associated with guilt, but a lot of it is they know that there are people of color who may not embrace the same values that white Americans do, and so they view the world through the lens of being threatening to them, and being threatening to them personally. So, in the world of terrorism and all that other stuff, they still aren't going to look, in spite of the evidence that more often than not it's going to be a white guy who picks up an AR-15 and blasts a bunch of people in a crowd. They're still going to think that it's got to be a person of color who's more likely going to do those kinds of things. So, I mean, I wanted to mention those. Look, we're at the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk about Salamanca. And if you don't know why, stick around and I'll explain it a little bit. This is an issue that not only has to be addressed, but it's a conversation that needs to begin sooner than later. So we'll talk Salamanca when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Can't you hear the babies cry? Can't you see the parents try? Give a child a better life. He works an honest day for his honest pay. Still can't see him get ahead. Stay on that straight and narrow path. Don't give up now. How long can it last? Yeah, the time will come. You know the time will come, baby, when nice guys don't finish last, when the good don't die. Yeah, you know that time will come. Time will come. say that your heart is cold. Been hurt so many times before. Don't turn your back on precious love, 'cause there's somebody walking around feeling just like you are now. They ain't gonna come through your front door. Open up your heart and don't get down. What goes around will surely come around. Yeah, yeah, the time will come when nights got don't finish left, when the good don't die young.
All right, thanks for coming back. There's a little bit more Murray Porter. Hey, look, I want to thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Legacy 420 from Tandanega, and I want to thank individuals who, from time to time, they'll drop a check in the mail and kind of helps what we do here and helps me with not only this show but the show I do in New York, and that includes people like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Neville Spring, Roger Jock, a friend of mine who recently helped out, and I appreciate those things. You know, I also got to give a special mention to Ross. Ross actually put up some money to help me fundraise, not just for me, but for WBAI, the station that I'm on in New York City. It's a listener-supported radio station, and they do fund drives every so often. And so he offered, put some money up that I was able to use as matching funds to try to bring in donations, and we did pretty good with that. So I appreciate that help from Ross John, which goes beyond what he does in terms of supporting my work and my work here. But look, I also want to thank those who have helped in the past, because we are in our 8th year. We're almost finishing our 8th year. We're soon going to be entering our 9th year, and we couldn't have done it if I didn't have many of you who bought ads and we ran promos and you sponsored the work that I did especially when I was on commercial radio, which was expensive. And now we're a little bit more streamlined, but we still have needs. But I do appreciate all of you who have helped, and you know who you are. There were several businesses, predominantly here in Seneca territory, but in Tonawanda as well. And I thank all of you for supporting what we do here, even if it's been in the past. I thank you for that, because you helped me get here where we're at now, and it's your way of helping the fight, because what we talk about here are oftentimes issues that we have to address, and we have to raise awareness to, and that's part of the struggle. Look, I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. I want to thank CKWE again for the simulcast and the rebroadcast of this show, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. These are internet radio networks that carry the show. And of course, I want to thank all of you who share the show, whether you share the Facebook live stream or as a live stream or as a live stream. Those of you who share the SoundCloud links that I post up later. And those of you who share the YouTube videos that we create from our video streaming. So I want to thank all of you for not just supporting the show, but for sharing the show and helping get the word out. The conversations that I try to initiate here, or if not initiate, expand upon, are conversations that I think need to happen. And one of the conversations that needs to be addressed is the city of Salamanca. Now, 95% of the city of Salamanca is on land leased from the Seneca Nation. Through the Salamanca Lease Settlement Act of 1990, there were certain things that were established in terms of how monies could still be taxed to people who lived in Salamanca to support municipal services, but those people also had to pay a lease to the Seneca Nation. Now, Senecas could buy property in Salamanca and take it off the tax rolls completely, because it was their land, right? But one of the things that was clear even back in 1990 was that the sustainability of some place like the city of Salamanca was not taken care of. I mean, and as a result, it is unsustainable. Now, one of the things that gave Salamanca a huge boost was building, the Seneca Nation building a casino down there, and as a part of the revenue sharing program they had with the state that has now expired, 25% of the revenue generated from the slots in Salamanca at the Seneca Allegheny Casino went to the state, and then 25% of that came back to the city of Salamanca. So, and it's somewhere to the tune of $6-7 million a year that was coming into the city of Salamanca. Well, as it turns out, that $6 or $7 million a year represented the majority of all municipal revenue for the city of Salamanca. I mean, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of the revenue that that the city of Salamanca has to play with was coming from gaming revenue, and that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, that's gone. That's done. So Salamanca is in serious trouble. They're in trouble anyway because of not just their dependency on the revenue sharing with the state. Not, again, this wasn't money going directly from the Seneca Allegheny Casino to the city of Salamanca. This is only 25% of what that gaming facility sent to the state would come back. So, I mean, it's problematic on a couple of different ways. But also the shrinking tax base. It is not an area that can increase its taxes, very much. It is not an economic boon. I mean, the biggest thing in Salamanca is the gaming facility. So it's a situation that, especially with more and more Senecas buying property down there, that shrinks the tax base even more. So the revenue available for the city of Salamanca is very, very depleted. And like I said, the gaming revenue that they were getting back from the state was representing, a large majority of their entire municipal revenue. And with that gone, the question is, how long can the city of Salamanca survive? And what happens when it doesn't survive? Obviously, the Senecas will not, the Seneca Nation and the Seneca people will not sit back and let the city go into receivership to the county or to the state. It's Seneca land. So the question is going to be when does the Seneca Nation begin a process to work with the municipal government that is there, and try to make some arrangements, I guess, to transition the city of Salamanca back into into control and an operation by the Seneca people. They have a paid police force. They have a paid fire department. There's obviously a lot of municipal salaries, and some of those things are just going to go away. So how does the Seneca Nation begin the process of taking over some of those responsibilities with a clear plan to transition the city of Salamanca out of its municipal standing and into a city or a municipality owned and operated, controlled by the Seneca Nation? There's opportunities here. There's been talk for many years about, what could a native territory do if they, or a native people do if they had certain infrastructure, and to expand that infrastructure. I mean, the idea of turning Salamanca into a smart city, for instance, with with some of the technological advances, that could be something that could be done. I mean, I say this with trying to make people understand. This is all the more reason that the Seneca Nation can't keep sending 25% of its revenue to the state of New York to allow a little bit of it to trickle back. The Seneca Nation has to take care of itself, and it has to take care of its land, including the land that isn't just occupied by them. The Seneca Nation has expanded its land holdings, and especially with the purchase of land in Buffalo and Niagara Falls and other places. But the city of Salamanca, that is something that the Seneca Nation is ultimately probably going to have to, sooner than later, take some action on, because this idea of having a city council, and I don't know what how many paid positions there are, but the whole process of the municipal services and salaries, there's going to have to be some I don't know, some negotiations on how to eliminate redundancies. Perhaps there's some things that the Seneca Nation is doing through the rest of Allegheny, their territories, that can play a role in covering or reducing or eliminating some of the redundancy at the city level. But this is a look, and the mayor of Salamanca is a Seneca, and yet there still seems to be an impasse. I mean, we've talked about the lack of meeting and collaboration that Niagara Falls and Buffalo have had with the Seneca Nation, and at least in terms of services and paying for services and working out service agreements and that kind of stuff, and perhaps other types of mutual beneficial projects that they can work on. There's been nothing, and part of the reason is politics. These guys have lined themselves up, both Byron Brown and to a larger extent Paul Deister, lined themselves up behind Andrew Cuomo and won't cross him. And of course, Byron Brown isn't in as vulnerable a situation as someplace like Niagara Falls, and certainly not Salamanca. But Niagara Falls has been, we've been listening to a lot of noise coming out of Niagara Falls about how devastating the loss of this $15 to $20 million that they were receiving. They were receiving a lot more than Buffalo and Salamanca, because Seneca Niagara is the Seneca Nation's flagship gaming facility, and it is more of their signature facility. So there's a lot more revenue that happens there, and so Niagara Falls became dependent on that too. Now, it may not represent 60 or 70% of its operating budget, but it still represented a significant portion of it. And yet, guys like Paul Deister and other folks from Niagara Falls have not been willing to sit and see if there's some arrangements they can make that may help alleviate some of their shortcomings in their budget. And that seems strange. But stranger yet is the idea that there's a Seneca who ran and won the mayor's office in Salamanca, and he too seems to be lined up more, hoping that somehow the governor is going to prevail, so gaming revenue can continue to feed into the Salamanca, Buffalo, and Niagara Falls. And of course, the problem that seems to be ignored, and I've mentioned this before, by all three of these municipalities and anybody else who is hanging on, hoping that revenue is going to come their way from the state off of this revenue sharing, is the fact that in order for that to happen, there's still a lion's share, 75% of all of the revenue that was shared with the state stayed out of the region. I mean, at 14 years, $1.1 billion left Western New York. And it left Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Salamanca. And in fact, I would argue that Niagara Falls has been a beneficiary of a lot of money here, and some of that money is sucked out of other areas of Western New York. I mean, it's not just Niagara Falls residents that are gambling at the Seneca Niagara Casino. 25% of the patronage is from out of the state, out of the region. But 75% is from Western New York in general, including Buffalo. Buffalo loses revenue and loses disposable income in the region to places like Niagara Falls in general. But certainly, when you consider Niagara Falls was getting a much bigger take out of revenue sharing from the state, you could argue that they were getting a disproportionate amount because it was based on Seneca gaming, not based on anything Niagara Falls themselves was doing specifically. But again, bringing this back to Salamanca, it's really disturbing that there seems to be no communication, none that I'm aware of, and of course I'm not in. There may be some conversation happening, I'm just not aware of it. But I've not seen any movement. I've not seen anything in any of the media coverage that suggests that the city of Salamanca is kind of accepting their fate. that they are not a sustainable municipality, and that their only way to survive as a municipality is to become a municipality under the control and operation and control of the Seneca Nation. And until the process starts for that to happen, it's going to be frightening to watch the city of Salamanca, and again, understanding that Seneca land, the Senecas are going to watch their land holdings degrade, and degrade in a way that could be disturbing. And in fact, watching roads become further in disrepair, watching look, I don't know about the police department, whether they were overstaffed in the first place or not, but watching that deteriorate, watching equipment deteriorate in terms of vehicles, fire equipment, emergency equipment, watching all of this stuff deteriorate, is going to be disturbing. And the sooner some sort of arrangement is made between the city of Salamanca and the Seneca Nation, which ultimately is going to mean handing over the keys. You know what I mean? There's no other way around this thing. It is simply an unsustainable situation. It was always going to be unsustainable, but now it almost became exacerbated by the fact that the city has become so dependent on a termed revenue sharing agreement, one that has timed out. So now, rather than it just being a gradual decline for the city of Salamanca, they are now feeling the pinch, because now it's been over a year since any dollars have flowed from the state's revenue sharing, because it's been over a year since the term ended. So now you're going to start to see the real impacts, especially to places like Niagara Falls and Salamanca. Buffalo, they have other things happening, and they've got a lot of support from the state. Salamanca even has a significant amount of support from the state, but Salamanca is going to be one of those areas that's going to be hard pressed to have any meaningful support from the state, and the county is fairly destitute as well. It is not an area that has experienced any kind of economic recovery. So the city of Salamanca only has one option, and that option is the Seneca Nation. So it is going to be interesting to see. And this is the conversation that needs to begin. And perhaps if the powers that be, so if the Seneca Nation and city officials can't begin that conversation, then I'm always a proponent of saying, well, then it's time the people start having that conversation. More and more Senecas have to reach out, and if you're non-native and you live in the city of Salamanca, perhaps it's time for you to start looking at the overtures that you can make to see something happen. Look, I don't see a situation where anybody's ever going to get run out of the city of Salamanca, with the possible exception of some elected politicians, I guess. But in order for positive and meaningful things, and there are some positive and meaningful things that could happen in the city of Salamanca. I mean, Salamanca does have some infrastructure that other parts of Seneca territory don't have. I mean, they've got better communication lines, they've got cable, they've got high-speed internet, they have an interstate that runs through that's not a toll road that you can't just jump on. They've got a toll road. There's still been talk about extending 219 all the way down to Salamanca. So there's a lot of possibilities that could be something that the Senecas could build upon with Salamanca. But the question is, what? I mean, and again, I know that I've talked about the invitation that Joe Griffo has sent out as the chairman of the Senate Committee on State Native Relations, wanting to know how they could help maximize the assets that the Seneca Nation has. And obviously not just for the Seneca Nation. His concern his interest in how they could maximize the benefits of those assets for the region. Well, the asset is sovereignty. I mean, the biggest asset that the Seneca Nation has is its regulatory advantages. And those regulatory advantages are tied directly to the fact that they are not part of the state. that they are not governed by the state. And having having something like the city of Salamanca with some of its infrastructure and some of the characteristics that Salamanca does represent, I mean, it does have the potential for tourism. Obviously, there's a gaming facility there. It's in ski country. It's got the Allegheny State Park close by. There are some things that could be done to maximize economic development in Salamanca. And again, some of the infrastructure exists there. So the question again remains: when do Seneca Nation agencies, economic development agencies, and the like, begin to have a serious conversation? And like I said, maybe they are, but I don't know that those internal conversations are turning into the kinds of conversations that need to be had with the city of Salamanca. And it's probably not a terrible idea to involve the people in these conversations. So more vision can be taken in, be a part of this process. And when I say the people, I mean the Seneca people, but also the non-Senecas who live there, who may, if approached it in the right way, would understand the value of the city of Salamanca being run, operated, managed by the Seneca Nation. Certainly it wouldn't break the bank for the Seneca Nation to fund the status quo, but it wouldn't be in their best interest to just throw money into a non-Seneca municipality. It would make more sense for them to put together their own system for managing the city, whether it fit within some of their current agencies, or whether they developed a specific city of Salamanca department. I mean, this is a conversation that does need to be had. It is a unique situation. There aren't a whole lot of places in the on the planet, but certainly the uniqueness of land title as it exists here for Haudenosaunee, including the Seneca Nation. We have absolute title. The lands that we live on are not held by the federal government for our use and enjoyment. The city of Salamanca is leased. It is not U.S. soil. It's a unique animal that exists in terms of being a municipality, a state municipality on land that is not a part of the state. I mean, that doesn't exist anyplace else. I mean, it's a weird circumstance, but it's also a circumstance that creates opportunity. And perhaps some of the state's political will and the county's political will and the Seneca Nation's political will could create something that is a unique animal, I guess, a unique living condition, and that's what needs to be pursued. And this isn't one that anybody should wait till the bottom drops off out. I don't think anybody should wait until the city has essentially crumbled before our very eyes, and that's always a risk. It's got a beautiful river that runs through it still, the one that people fought hard to maintain, from being contaminated by hydrofracking fluid. It has this beautiful state park. Again, it's close by ski country, and of course it has one of the Seneca Nation's major resort casinos there, with the possibility to do more. I mean, there is the potential to build more tourism into the city of Salamanca or into that region, and that's something that really has to be considered. Even as the Seneca Nation is now, I guess, improved its operating margins by not paying 25% to the state, it may have to look at where it directs some of those funds and how they turn the city of Salamanca circumstance into an attribute rather than just another service that they have to cover, or more obligations. And especially as they weigh it out. Look, there is the opportunity to still have a taxing circumstance, I guess, because there are non-natives that have been paying municipal taxes. So trying to figure out how that works and whether it no longer is a tax and now instead it's an increase in the Salamanca lease, or the lease that they pay. there's a way to work it out, and that's something that really has to be considered. I know I haven't really talked about this much on the program before, and I throw it out there now. And look, there's some people probably thinking I'm crazy for suggesting some of the things, but somebody has to come up with some suggestions. And as I look at the city of Salamanca, and knowing that 60 to 70% of their operating budget has just been eliminated, that's not something that bodes well for trying to manage a city. I don't know what Smitty, the mayor of Salamanca, has in mind. I don't know what plan he has, but you've got to do more than just sit back and hope that the state is going to take care of you, especially a state that has done much to squander the not only the monies that they have received from Seneca Gaming, but now have found a way to replace that gaming with their own enterprises that will kick nothing back to Salamanca, Buffalo, and Niagara Falls. Yeah, because I think it's important that people realize the state hasn't lost its gaming revenue. It just replaced it. This thing termed out, 14 years ended, at the same time that their licensed casinos paying somewhere between 40 and 50% to the state have come online. Now they're not performing very well, but I suspect what the state is receiving from its gaming facilities, especially with their flagship facility opening up in the Catskills, I got to think that the state's going to have an increase in its gaming revenue, even with the Seneca Nation no longer sending 150, 160, $200 million a year to the state. And if they aren't making that up on their own casinos, then again, shame on them for planning poorly. But the ones who miss out the most, obviously, it's not the state of New York. It is the municipalities that were counting on that 25% coming back. I mean, the state could still send money to Salamanca, Buffalo, and Niagara Falls. I just don't see it happening. So this is where that conversation has to happen. I figured this was as good a show as any to present this. Maybe we'll see some conversation over it, and we'll follow it up on future shows. So, look, I'm not going to New York next week, so I'm around. I've got a project that I'm working on here locally. One day I'll turn it into a show. I will say, though, on Monday, I've got Robert Freight Parker coming. He's going to join us on the air. He's got some excitement because his CD has been nominated for an award, and we're going to have him on to talk about that when he joins us on Monday. So look for that. For now, I guess that's Yahweh. We'll see you on Monday. Thank you.
Red